you for taking your time, the time to join us today. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome Nissim Black to our program, and we're very excited to hear a little bit about his life journey. We've been studying different people's life journeys over the last little while with our podcast series as well, under the Winter Wisdom program as well. And what we've learned is that every single person, as the Baal Shem Tov says, every single person makes different stops along the path in life. He calls it the 42 stops that just like the Jewish people made 42 stops along the way from land of Egypt to the land of Israel. Everyone has their journey to their own promised land. And it's important to study, different people's journeys and learn from their experiences and their challenges and their life stories, so we can learn from them, internalize that to our lives. So it's with a great honor and pleasure that we learned today about the life journey of Nissim Black, who went from one part of the world to another part of the world, not just geographically speaking, but culturally speaking, religiously speaking, probably in every way possible. And it's a great honor and pleasure to introduce Nissim Black to our program.
Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and very, very happy to be a part of the program today. Again, excuse my little tardiness, since having some issues with my setup. Baruch Hashem, my name is Nissim Black. I am originally from Seattle, Washington. I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, and I thank Hashem as much as I remember that He let me leave Seattle, Washington. Either way it goes, although I love the people, Baruch Hashem, there's nothing like being in Eretz HaKodesh here in Eretz Yisrael. Very, very beautiful, beautiful experience for me and my family, Baruch Hashem, to be here living in the land. As I mentioned, Seattle, my journey began as a kid. I was born into on the more interesting side, I would say, is both my mother and my father were both rappers. So I was born into a hip hop love family. They used to call me the Seattle Love Child, hip hop's love child, because both my mother and my father both were a part of two groups that pioneered rap. The Emerald Street Boys, which was a pioneering hip hop group in Seattle. My father was a part of, and the Emerald Street Girls was the hip hop pioneer group for women in Seattle. So, I probably could have found a profession being a janitor or something else, but Shem chose otherwise, and sort of been in my DNA to make noise from the time I was born. And with that, I grew, a very, very strong love, and I would say even very, very deep attachment to music in general. At least for the first 8 years of my life, you could not have convinced me that I was not Michael Jackson. I used to sleep with a dirty white glove, of course, with my teddy bear, my me monster, I think I had, moonwalking all day long and kicking and hee-heeing and everything else. Was a very, very big fan of Mike as a kid. But I think that love, really pushed me into having a, deep desire to create my own music. Also, my parents happened to also have been drug dealers. So I was at a very, very early age, would not have been able to tell you that there was some different type of lifestyle. They both sold drugs, heavy drugs. I myself always say I entered the family business at a very early age. By the time I was 9 already, I was smoking weed, marijuana. By the time I was 12, I was already selling my own drugs and already running with the street gang, Gangster Disciple, better known as GDN today, Gangster Disciple Nation, which was a street gang that originated originally in Chicago, which had made its way to the West Coast, I want to say, during the mid 80s. And I found myself getting in trouble left and right, especially during these preteen years. By the age 13, which was a very defining year for me in a lot of different ways. I was expelled from the Seattle School District for threatening someone. And it was a pretty intense threat. And, and I also figure, I had spent so much time that year inside the principal's office. I was probably there more than the principal or the principal's furniture. So, it was only one more straw that it was going to take for me to get expelled from the school. And ultimately, due to the nature of my threat and the activity that I was involved in that they knew about, led me to be considered a threat to the district. So I was not allowed to go to school inside the district, and was later, had to bus out to an alternative school, which I found there to not be the best environment either, because all they did was put me with a bunch of other kids that were also kicked out of the school district, which I would definitely say this was a very, very dark time in my life. In terms of religion, backing up a little bit in terms of years, when I was 8 years old, my grandfather, who had spent most of his life in prison, he was originally from Chicago, had a very, very hard life. I think he ran away from home when he was 11 years old to go find his father, who he knew was on base in the military, or I think maybe in the Navy. But for whatever reason, he was stationed in Washington and Fort Lewis. So he ran away from home at the age of 11, and came up to Seattle, Washington. And he had found himself in a lot of trouble all throughout his life. He had spent most of his life in prison. And they let him out on parole. So he came to live with us. He didn't have a place yet. And it was an awesome opportunity, for not only me, but my mother, who, didn't get to spend so much time with her father growing up, also because of, his lifestyle. Uh, he came to live with us, and that was my first real introduction to religion. Previous to this, every once in a while, a cousin or uncle or an aunt will come and get me and take me to the church with them, maybe on Easter Sunday or something like that. But I wasn't really involved in Christianity up until that point. My parents were not religious. And he came to live with us and introduced me to Islam. I prayed with him 5 times a day. I went to the mosque on Fridays, and here and there he would give me different teachings. I knew a little bit of Arabic even as a kid, at least how to make certain blessings, and at least how to pray, which was shortly forgotten. It was surely forgotten over the years, but that experience was positive for me because uh, being able to first off be exposed to something and to a certain discipline, I think sort of in a very early type of way, like planted a seed for me later on to become more faith seeking. Um, Maybe a year, I want to say maybe a year and a half after, my grandfather came to live with us, he shortly got his own place, and he eventually found himself back in prison due to a probation violation. He went back to prison, and unfortunately, he was there until he expired. And from that time on, from that encounter being my grandfather, if anybody had asked me what my religion was, I would have told them I'm Muslim. Um, Although I wasn't so deep into the faith, especially even after my grandfather had left, I was even less. The extent of my Islam was that when he called from prison and say, Salam alaikum, I will answer him, wa alaikum salam. So that was the extent of it. But if he might say, I say I'm Muslim. Also, during the age of 13, another two amazing things would happen to me. The first thing was I recorded my first professional record with a big producer in Seattle. His name was Vitamin D. And we started with one song, and then we produced a second song. And, just to have such an amazing opportunity underneath my belt so early made me really feel very, very confident in myself, at least from an artistic standpoint. And shortly after this, a friend of mine who was also very into rap, um, he invited me to come to this hip hop program. Now, this hip hop program happened to be at a place called the Union Gospel Mission, which was a youth outreach center for kids, basically to keep them out of trouble. But even more than that, it was a faith-based center that did its job in terms of missionizing, in the neighborhood. Which none of that at all scared me or whatever. I just had a place to go and to work on my craft and as far as music went. So I started going here. Nobody mentioned anything to me about God or anything like that. What it did do was it put me in a situation where I was able to be around people that were not reflecting the same type of behaviors that were going on at my own house. To paint a picture, from the time I was in elementary, I would come home from school and I would see kilos of dope on the table, people cooking crack, cocaine in the kitchen, people all simultaneously, a craps game being shot outside of the door, garbage bags full of marijuana, and my house always being in a hot spot with so many people. In fact, we were battle rammed, and I believe in 1995 by the FBI, in which they took one of my uncles. I remember leaving home, not knowing what was going on. When the officers got me dressed, and when I left the house, the whole entire house was in handcuffs. My mother was on the floor in handcuffs, and I had no idea who was going to be home when I got back. Very, very traumatic experiences, as you can imagine. So being able to, be at a center like this really became a safe haven. I spent a lot of time there, so much time, that, I would say it became my first home, and I just slept at my house. And eventually, after building great relationships there, they invited me to come with them to a summer camp. The summer camp happened to be in the middle of Oregon, middle of nowhere. And it was a missionary camp, but I know that at the beginning, first thing I had was a hesitation because I grew up in a certain neighborhood. We didn't go to camp. Camping was sort of like, what's what camp? Like we don't go camping. So I ended up going. It actually wasn't so camp-ish. It was much more of a resort, a getaway, beautiful campus and campgrounds with every single game and amenity that you could possibly think of. The food was amazing. There was a great speaker there by the name of Bill Page. You never forget. He came there, he spoke, he told his story. And what he would do is, after he was done giving over his story, he would give a set of questions, and we would all go back to our cabin and discuss these different questions. So what they call cabin time became my favorite part of camp, because it was a channel for us to open up and talk about, all the things that we were going through. And these are all other inner city kids that had very similar upbringings to me. So it was a very, very positive experience. And I left that camp, converted to Christianity, a reborn again Christian. Even though I wasn't one before, it's still reborn. I don't know how that works, but it worked. So I ended up leaving, and it was an awesome uh, thing for me because of where I was headed in life. Had I probably not had that experience, I don't know if I would be here talking to you, because it was a very, very defining time, as I mentioned, and it was almost at the right time, because it was like a reset of downs for me, in terms of I was able to get back into the school district, which was important because this was my first year of high school, and it was almost like the biggest reset, at that time, for me to be able to, like, say, improve myself, that I was willing and ready to change and be a new person. And I became a Bible thumper immediately. Like, I got my hands on a Bible, and at that time I highlighted it so much that it was no point of even highlighting it anymore, because I had read through the whole entire thing, highlighting everything, having questions. I was involved in Bible study groups, and all this would start to fade and wane, as I got maybe halfway through my ninth grade year of high school. They had a pep rally assembly where they had, someone from each class come down and represent the class in different competitions. The last competition that they did was a rap battle, and that happened to be my sport. And long story short, I got up and I did it. After that, I became the most popular kid in my class. Every week there was a new rap battle after that, and it was sort of like my claim to fame, in terms of high school. So that would distract me heavily. I spent my time making even more music. I had the privilege of that same producer I recorded with when I was 13 had moved his studio into my basement. It was like a deal he did with my dad that, if he moved in, then he wouldn't have to pay electricity as long as he taught me everything that he knew. So I got to learn from a very, very big pro. Different artists, at least B and C level artists were coming through there all the time in terms of notoriety and fame. I got to learn from, some of the greats. And so it was a great payoff for me. So with that, I had the opportunity to create at a amazing and a very, very fast rate. And so I became very consumed. Between that, I was playing football, American football. I don't think I have to say that, but real football I was playing. And between sports, football, and going to school, I found myself very, very wrapped up. And so my involvement at the center sort of started to fade. That will end around my 10th grade year. Maybe halfway through the year, I remember coming in from a lunch period. And there wasn't nothing up until that point that may have allowed for what I was to experience. I remember coming in from that lunch period and all of a sudden feeling this crazy feeling and experience I started having out of nowhere. By this time, I was not involved in any type of drugs or anything like that. I had already stopped smoking when I was 13 years old. So already now I'm 16 years old. And this experience was so powerful. And I remember looking around at everybody in the hallway. And I started to say to myself, I don't belong here. And I started to feel a very, very deep feeling of feeling I was out of place, feeling like, I knew something that nobody else knew. And I was unable to put my finger on what it was, but it was a very, very powerful experience. As I always say, after 10 minutes of like tripping out for whatever reason I was tripping out, I ate a chicken nugget, the whole thing went away. But the impact of what happened was would leave me to some degree searching and wondering for what just had happened to me. So I felt and I took it as this was some type of sign from God that He was trying to speak to me, because that was a very, very powerful experience. So I started getting myself more involved at the mission, the Union Gospel mission that I was involved in. And when I say involved, very involved. I got involved in every single Bible study group, every youth leadership program I can get involved in. I became a junior missionary. They gave me my little smicha card, and I went to Mexico and started building orphanages and all these different things. And it was a very, very awesome and defining point for me also too, because there I discovered not only my great desire or the great strength that I had, but I sort of start to see that my gift was outreach, was bringing people in. How did I know? Because by the end of that school year, going into the next school year, I had almost half of my high school involved in every single program that there was. I mean, heavily influential, and bringing people from my high school and other kids from other high schools started to come. And I became the poster child for this organization. Literally, you would drive down, I-5 and see a big billboard of me. They started doing interviews with me from some of the private Catholic schools to talk about a lot of my missionary work that I was doing. And it was a very, very defining moment in time for me to be able to start to realize my own strengths and gifts and really, sort of what I felt like I was put here to do. And time would go until my end of my 11th grade year, and a demo of mine made it to the desk of a talent scout from a very big record label. After that, I got a call from this talent scout and was in touch with them. And up until that point, when they heard my music, although they liked it, was very clean. Obviously, I wasn't talking about a lot of the other things. I wouldn't say I was speaking in terms of the things that I talk about now, but it was ultimately it was very, very clean and very, very cool and very fresh sound. Unfortunately, at that time, in terms of rap, The leading style of rap at that time was heavy gangster rap, which was not did not reflect where I was at that time in my life. I wasn't foreign to it by no means, but it just didn't reflect where I was in my life at that time. And so slowly over time of sending these demos and having a conversation, eventually I was asked to, you know, make the raps a little bit more gangster, use some swear words a little bit here and there, to toughen up the rap. And at the time, I remember feeling like, there's no way in the world I can like do that and live with myself, because I don't feel like I don't feel like I have it in me to sort of like, you know, put that out. Just no longer the person that I am and the person that I want to be. So they, waved a lot of money in my face in terms of a proposal contract. It wasn't an official contract. It was just a proposal for a deal. And after that, very shortly after that, I started turning in very gangster records that were very harsh. And it was so interesting because um, it wasn't long before I became very confused about who I was. As I started sending in these records, changing the persona of who I was, I started to notice that also my crowd started to change. A lot of the individuals that I had distanced myself from over the years, as I started going in a different path, slowly started to come back into my circle, my inner circle. And you don't really have the opportunity to pretend something for too long. So after a while, it started to get to me. And I found myself even more confused because I was also blessed just before this to meet my wife. And I've been with my wife since I was 17 years old, in high school sweethearts. And she was a very good church going girl. And because of that, I was one way around her and one way around my friends. So it was very easy for me to find myself confused about who I was. And I would say that it wasn't until we were like near the end of a campaign that I was meeting with a reporter that finally started to say to me, I remember at the end of it said, you know what? You're really a nice guy. Like, I would have never thought, I'm thinking to myself, like, what was I supposed to be, And and at that time I thought, and later on it came to me, I was coming to people in darkness, expecting them to see my light. But the things that I was talking about and the things that I was portraying was far beyond the darkness. And shortly after this, I would find myself in a very scary and crazy situation. Prior to of which I lost my mother. I lost my mother. I was 19. My mother was 37. She died of an overdose. And I remember being in the studio late that night, and she had been dozing off quite a bit. And I finally put her in my bed, and I got my younger sister out of her bed to go sleep with our mother, and she didn't wake up that day. And that pain at that time, because I felt like my mother was my best friend, was very deep, and sort of to some degree it numbed me. I felt very numb after that pain so sudden. She was so young, I was so young, and trying to navigate with that pain and push through everything that that I had been through already up until that point in my life was very tough. So I really clung to my music, and I made my music really my vessel to get out all of my frustration and everything that I was feeling. So long story short, after this, the major label had pulled out. I had already had by this time meetings with other big companies that were also interested in the music, interested in the brand, and none of these worked out in the end. Nothing worked out. I remember coming back to Seattle after what I thought was going to be a promising trip that I had in New York, and everything had went south. So we decided to put out the album independently, and we made a lot of noise independently, very much so. And really grassroots, from selling CDs out of the trunk, getting kicked out of every mall, every store, I would sit outside the nightclubs. At this time I was 19 years old. I couldn't even get into the nightclubs. I used to stand outside and wait for people to come out, with a whole box of CDs to sell CDs. Very, very, young, eager, and hungry, and we made a lot of money every day doing that. Nonstop hustle from the morning up into the night. And so with that, things started to spread from a very guerrilla, organic type of way, and all the news papers, they started to pick it up, and magazines, it started to spread up and down the coast. And as this, began to grow, there were other artists who obviously wasn't so happy for the success because they wanted to get their name out. And there was one particular artist who had decided, one of the ways that he would go about, promoting himself was to make a diss track, a song against me, and in hopes that I would respond, and then once I respond, people would know who he is. However, the chevra that I was around at the time was of no no games and no intent of giving any PR. And one of my close friends had suggested, instead of making a song back, that we just go and find him and beat the guy up. And unfortunately, we went with that decision, and we ended up meeting at a nightclub and getting into a big fight outside, big brawl. And by the time I got there with the guys that I was with, there had already been 2 or 3 cars. I think it was 2 more other cars that had went up to go fight him before I had even got there. So, the talk about the overprotection that my friends had of me, because I was never, even when I was in the streets and when I was in the fights and I was acting that way, I was still known in the streets as a peacemaker. I was bringing people together because I lived on the other side where I lived basically behind enemy lines of the gangs that I was associated with. But because of the connections and the people that I knew over there, I was able to walk around freely, and I was okay in that area. And I was able to keep relationships between other people from the other side. So I was really much more so known as a much more of a peacemaker. So people that were close to me took even a heavier offense that a person, would sort of step out of line and try to attack me in any type of way, and verbally. So safe to say, it turned into a very ugly issue that later on turned into a kill or be killed situation, as a friend of mine would go up after I left and try to kill the other person. He missed, turned into a high-speed chase, and the police caught him. By the time the police caught him, I was coming out from the office after getting a call that the police were looking for me. I was on my way to the car. I look down the block and I see a good friend of mine in handcuffs, whole car surrounded with guns. I later on that day that night found out that he went up after and tried to take this other person's life. And now the other guys, the opposing side, was looking for me. So it was either I went to go take the other person's life, or he was going to come and take my life. And I always tell people that who want to personify a certain lifestyle, especially a street lifestyle, you would definitely get your chance to show if that's what you're really about. You would definitely get an opportunity to show you that you will to show everybody if this is the type of street. You will not get to pretend for too long, especially if you find yourself dealing to some degree in those murky waters, if you will. So I remember sitting in my living room and just starting to have flashes of my life and my mind, thinking about all my days in the Bible study groups that I was in and leadership programs and all the beautiful things that I was able to do, in terms of religion and the growth that I experienced. And I started to ask myself, how did I get here? How did I get to such a place where I can possibly, I could possibly lose my life or be in a situation where I have to take someone else's? And I started to cry and I started to pray. And I realized for myself that this is not the type of lifestyle that I wanted to live. And I already knew, because internally I already knew that there was more to life than what I was trying to personify and what I was trying to portray. And I fell to my knees and I started crying and I started praying, and I was praying for some way out, because the last thing I wanted to do was to have to take someone else's life. And so It was an amazing opportunity that Hashem created for me, an opportunity to put everything behind us. I later got a call from the other guy from the opposing side. It was him, another person on the phone, and we talked and we put everything behind us. And the whole full conversation put everything behind us, which I always tell people was a nace, nigla, mamash. It was a big miracle because nobody ever calls to find out if you're trying to kill them. You know, it's just not a call, that a gang member will make to verify the facts if you're trying to kill him. He was shot at. His life was put in danger, and anybody who had any hint of involvement, has to pay for what he went through. So the fact that we got on the phone and were able to squash things and settle things like men, I looked at as God answering my prayers at that time. After I hung up the phone and cried and thanked God, I started to just reflect and to think and to make a serious cheshbon nefesh. Really started to think very, very hard. And I started to realize for myself that I can't keep portraying and I can't keep living a life that's something that's contrary to what I even know to be true. I know there's more. I know that there's a God in the world, right? So how could I continue to live my life and act as if, there's no God? like I have no, there's no creator, and I just go and I couldn't continue to pretend with myself. So I stayed home praying every day. I wouldn't talk to friends and different things like that. There was only one friend, I would talk to at the time. Apart from him, I stayed away, cut off my phone. My other really close friend was now in prison, um, doing a sentence behind, and trying to shoot at the other guy. And the other dilemma that I was facing at the time was very, very harsh because my friend who tried to kill the other rapper who found himself in prison, we had just released his album. I had the imprint, the record label that I was releasing our music underneath. I had me and one other partner. The money that I had got to produce his record had came from a drug dealer. They obviously needed their money back. Now I don't have an artist out to promote the album that he's invested in. So I found myself just like in a world of trouble after this situation. And the only thing that I felt like could save me was prayer. And we fought and we prayed. This is me and my wife at this time, my girlfriend. We were still dating at this time, and I remember shortly after I had proposed to my wife, I started to really, really go deeper with my reflections and my thoughts, and started to really think about like how could it be, that God pulled me out of that situation, and for me to have another chance like this, and through everything that I saw in my life up until this point, how could it be that I not drop everything and give my whole entire life to God? So I became even more focused. I picked back up my Bible and I started reading. And I'm going through it and I'm going through it. And I'm starting to see things in a different light because there's nobody around me. There's no missionary group. There's no grandpa. There's no anybody around me. And I started to notice this unwavering love that God had specifically with the Jewish people. When a person is raised in Christian ideology and thought, a lot of the passages of Pesukim that deal with Hashem's love for Klal Yisrael and all the future promises of Klal Yisrael and Israel as a nation tend to get taken onto the church and almost completely excludes the Jewish people, unfortunately. Whether there's the conscientious of replacement theology in Christianity, or even if people are not conscious of it, it exists. So I started to read this and I started to really see like, wow, what an amazing love and reflection of God's love that I'm seeing here, because everybody here just keeps messing up. It keeps growing up over and over again. And God is showing his allegiance that I will never give up, or I will never stop loving you. Even after all the prophets are giving so much tochacha, so much rebuke then there's still words of love and menucha and so many promises. And for me, I started to long and pine to want to be a part of that love. I started to research more and more the root of Christianity. And when I got to the root, I started to find things that were crazy. And it wasn't before long that I, had all the books before me, Christian books. I was going through the Quran. Also, I had I had the JPS Tanakh, and I was going through these different books, trying to just find the truth. And I wouldn't stop until my head was like hurting at the end of the night, and it was hard for me to go to sleep. And I started to pray, and I started to fast, go out fasting. I would go 3 days, literally, with no food, and I did this at times. I would do it. And I will go out crying to God for hours from the bottom of my heart, just asking for the truth. What is the truth? And what that did to me at the time, and it made me so spiritually sensitive. I was so sensitive, and in my prayers, I felt so connected and so close to God. And after a while, I settled and I put the Tanakh down before me. I knew that Christianity wasn't the path I wanted to go, and I knew that Islam wasn't the path that I wanted to go. And I spent 2 years in a messianic congregation, which was like a Jews for JC. And I went that path trying to make it all work, and it just didn't work. And I found myself saying to God that I wanted to start over. And I read Tanakh from cover to cover, and I said to God, I only want to know your character. I'm going to read this book from cover to cover, and I only want to know your character. I want to know what you love. I want to know what you hate. I want to know what you desire. I want to know you. This is what I want to do. And I went through the whole thing twice. And I think that because of me going through it, it was part of the reason why I was praying so hard and crying so hard, because every page that I was turning, that's what everybody was doing. That's what everybody was doing. And so um, as I started to search for more things online, there was almost impossible for me to not come across Chabad.org. Anything Jewish I typed in on the internet, Chabad.org came up. And shortly after, a very close friend of mine, who's now my brother-in-law, Yosef Brown, we started going to a Chabad on the east side. We started talking to a rabbi there, and it was an amazing experience. Simultaneously, we were still fadingly connected to the congregation that we started going to. And at the end of everything, my wife had came to me one day and said that she wanted to convert, and which was pretty wild for me, because I, up until that point, had been moving much faster than my wife at this point. And I was very excited and happy to take the leap. However, I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, very, very close to Seward Park, the same community that I was Magaya and I grew up in. And so I didn't see any black Jews. So I thought to myself, maybe we're going to be, I've seen Jews in black, I never seen them black. So what happened was, Hashem would arrange for me shortly after this to be in a grocery store checking out groceries. And in between the beeps, I heard, bright light went off, and I heard Shabbat Shalom, brother. And I turn around, and there's a black Jew standing there. His name is Yaakov Lenin, and he invites me to come for Shabbos. So we ended up going for Shabbat, me and my wife, and we went the next week also too. And then other people inside the community also invited us for Shabbos. And shortly after that, from at his behest and other people's, we started working with the Rabbi Ben Zaken, in Seattle, Washington, to start a conversion. And it was me, my wife, my sister-in-law, and my sister-in-law was married to my best friend since kindergarten. So it was all four of us this time going on this journey together. We had one kid each, Baruch Hashem. And moving in the first place was already a big challenge to be able to find, such a place in the community. I mean, obviously the cost of living was really up in that part of the neighborhood, in that part of Seattle. So we ended up getting a place all together, one big house. They took the downstairs, we took the upstairs, we shared a kitchen. And that would go for a little bit. After a while, when we were getting closer to our time, and the rabbi says to us, listen, you're two separate families. And if you both, go through the Gerus, if you go at separate times, you have a major problem with you all living together. Because what's going to be with the Yamim Tovim, with the Chagim, what's going to be with cooking in the kitchen if one family finishes. So he suggested that we find separate places. So after a while, we found separate places, and the time was to come for us to go to the Beis Din. My family went first, and my brother and sister-in-law were scheduled to go another month after us. So we went through, had our first meeting. My brother and sister-in-law was supposed to go a month later. However, there was a major issue, some type of crisis in Kashrus, so the rabbis had to have an emergency meeting. So when they had the emergency meeting, a few days later, they scheduled in also my brother and sister-in-law. And in the Av Din, after meeting, both of us said that he was so compelled and so impressed with both families that he stood up and said, I want to do both families together. So Baruch Hashem, 7.5 years ago, both me, my wife, my brother and sister-in-law were all Magaya, Baruch Hashem, and we moved to Eretz Yisrael, Baruch Hashem, maybe 2.5 years after we were Magaya. And that is the short version of the story. So I wanted to be able to leave time open for anybody who may have questions or anything like that while we're on. I've seen a few coming in.
If anybody has any questions, please either write it in the chat or unmute yourself, and let's try to keep it in an orderly fashion. Go ahead, anybody.
There was one in there already.
Chat, Rabbi. I put the question in the chat.
Okay,
Or I'll ask it to you now. Did you ever have any interaction with Joseph Simmons from Run DMC?
No, I never had a run-in with him at all. I did meet his brother, Russell Simmons, but I never met him.
Hi. Rav Black,
Hello.
thank you so much. Such
Thank
a
you.
superb story. I have a question, actually. I'm sure you've seen on the news a few weeks ago that the Capitol building was stormed, and I'm sure that you also saw that there were Confederate flags, which is obviously a racial issue, and then we had also somebody who had a Camp Auschwitz T-shirt, which is also a religious issue. And now, of course, I'm, in your life, how do you navigate the racial issue and the anti-Semitic issues? I mean, obviously you're a poster child, and, thank God, but have you been confronted with the duality of these issues?
Very good question. I would say that, in a lot of different ways I have. I have a single that I released at the beginning of the year called Land Bounce. And one of the reasons why I released that song was because, I've gotten it on both sides, right? In the Jewish world, especially even specifically in the Orthodox world, people want to know how serious I am about my Judaism, how serious I take my Yiddishkeit, and is it for real, am I not, whatever. And Black people who see me all the time wants to know if I'm a traitor or am I white now, and I have. So I sort of had to deal with the brunt from even within. So I would say, and when I go even outside of that, the mostly I experienced, and this is just my honest opinion, I've experienced already in my 34 years. I would say I've experienced more anti-Semitism than I have even racism, right? I'm just being honest about myself. And I think the way I just go about it is like, I don't tolerate it, but at the same time, I don't go looking for it also, you know what I mean? I had the wonderful privilege of growing up in Seattle, Washington, and I feel like because I grew up there, these issues were always very sensitive. There may have been some systemic things that definitely took place that put us in my neighborhood at a lower advantage in terms of, education and different things like that. But I definitely would say that being able to keep my mind focused, really, especially these days, on Hashem and on my spiritual focus helps me to navigate through it very well. These things don't tend to bother me. I say a lot of times that we find ourselves in these situations, and I'm speaking not only as a Jew, speaking from an African-American experience also, who are known to be people of faith, people of spirituality, beyond. Um, we have always known to address our challenges and our troubles, with prayer and clinging to God. So that's sort of like been my focus through all of it. I've had some challenges here in Israel because of the color of my skin, and with getting my children into schools, right? I want to go see, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. The main advice he gave me was to pray. So I've always understood that as the answer, and not only did I pray and get myself away from those situations, I got very good schools, very good neighborhoods. My kids are very happy, and beyond. So I feel like, anything that I go through, I could conquer with prayer.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Just a reminder that if you're not talking, please mute yourselves because there's some background noise. We had a question from Mrs. Fish, Robertson Fish. How's your transition to Israel? How did that work? Was it easy? Was it hard? How was your transition to Israel?
It was easily hard because Baruch Hashem, you move. Obviously, we were very, very excited, and I think it was hard for me for different reasons. My adjustment was, it was shortly after Hashem Melech had come out, the song I did with God Elbaz back in 2015. And so already early 2016, when we were moving here, I had no idea that many people knew who I was. I didn't really take into account. I knew the song, it kind of went viral, but it was nuts when I got here, reporters. And so I sort of had to deal with like coming here thinking like I'm moving here to like really enhance and grow in terms of, my spirituality, and to leave all the distractions of America behind. I came here and, sort of had to deal with the challenge of being a very well-known person. I really didn't know how to take that. So that was one of the things I dealt with. Also from a cultural standpoint, I just grew up in a place, in an environment that, it's very, very dangerous to stare at people. You know what I mean? Over here, it's like a family sport, especially if you live in Meir Sharim or anywhere else that it's like, it's a family affair. So I had to get used to being stared at because I was different. I had to get used to being bumped or stepped on or being cut in line, and it being okay, just normal things that we have to adjust to here in Israel. And, but overall, I would say, we acclimated very well here since we've been here now, Baruch Hashem, and my kids are full-blown Israelis, and that comes with these challenges also too. But Baruch Hashem.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from Lee Frush is, I want to know what's your collaboration with God Elbaz, and how did it come about? What inspired you? And just along the same lines, Mike Abel wants to know the Hava song. Is it your take on one of the most well-known Jewish anthems? What inspired you, and do you think that other African Americans will explore Judaism? The question's on the chat.
Okay, I'll try to answer. So the first one is the God Elbaz collaboration came about through a friend of mine, Elon Cohen, who I think he had found me through an Aish article that they'd done on me, and he had also had an article on Aish around the same time, and he reached out to me about making some music together. We developed a friendship, and eventually he asked me if I would be interested in doing a remix to Hashem Melech with God Elbaz. And I said yes. He called God. He called me back. He said God says he wants to do it. So that was really the way that worked out. I hadn't met God, hadn't talked to him prior to that. And afterwards, we did the song. I think I recorded at home originally, and then I recorded again in New York shortly before we did the video. I did a second version of it, and we went to New York, and me and God met for the first time on set for the video shoot, and became really, really good friends after that, and built a good relationship. And that was pretty much the way that song worked out.
Great. And the second question, the Hava song, and what inspired you?
So the Hava song also was a very didn't come to me the normal ways. I would say 99, 98% of my music is all produced by my brother-in-law, Joseph Brown. And so, and usually I go through him, like, when I'm working with new producers and stuff like that, just because I trust not only his sound, but I trust, in terms of if he hears something that's really great, he always turns it over to me. I know he's like selfless in terms of that. So, usually, that's the channel that a producer will come through. That way, our manager, but somebody had sent a bunch of music to my old business line, which my wife had been using, and they sent a bunch of music through the WhatsApp. And so I on my way coming back, I was coming back from Shimon HaTzadik in Yerushalayim. Me and my wife and went there just to go, throw up some tefillas. And on my way back, my wife starts playing beats in the car. And I'm like, not only is that unusual, just unusual for my wife, she's like just playing. She didn't know what it was. She just started playing it. And this Hava Nagila came on. And I was like, oh, I kept telling her, play that one again, play that one again, play that one again. And so I got in touch with the producer. So it had already had the niggin together. So it wasn't like a great idea of mine, but he had made the music with me in mind, sort of to entice me towards that track, and it really worked. And so with the song, I sort of wanted to, address, as I was mentioning before, some of those issues on anti-Semitism directly that was coming from the African American community. So I spoke about certain things as far as Mr. Cannon, his show, and Steve Jackson, Wiley on the Twitter, and different things like that. I'm just, it's very, very hard for me at times because I'm a very, very laid back, non-confrontational type of person. But at the same time, I'm a warrior. So it's very, very hard for me to hold back those type of things after I see like constant disrespect of something and to not address or say something about it. So, and I felt like the Hava Nagila was most appropriate because it's for sure probably the most famous Jewish song that there is, that even also non-Jews would also know. So, and since my mission has been to reach and cast the net and reach as many people as I possibly can, I think that this song was like very, very appropriate to do.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, I think you have a question?
Yeah, just thank you, Rabbi. Just a couple actually, Nissim. I'm a huge fan. I think I have every one of your songs on my Amazon Music playlist, and Motherland Bounce is one of my favorites. But no problem. In lieu of that, just a couple questions for you. One is, what are the parts in Judaism that really are those that inspired you, like and inspire you daily and the most? The things that you kind of cling on to or hold to as far as the inspiration that brought you to Judaism. I'm also wondering, you are obviously observant, tending to a description of Orthodox. I'm just wondering, why was that your jump point versus, I know other people that have converted in, that are, go through a reform cycle, right? So how was it that you chose more of a more observant method? And then the last question is, I was just looking at something on this weekend. Israel is constantly undergoing accusations of racism, apartheid, and such, and the Ethiopian Olim community is just constantly in the news as far as the racial attitudes towards them, I guess, at least in Israel. Do you find that in Israel? I've not heard it directly from Israelis as far as what the status on the ground is in Israel regarding the racial, attitudes towards people that are all of the same community.
Okay. Let's try to remember each question. I think the first thing was about the inspiration.
Yeah.
I think, for me, I definitely was attracted. First, obviously, at the beginning of my learning, all I had was Tanakh. I didn't know anything about Chazal or the Oral Torah or Shulchan Aruch or Gemara, anything like that. So I had Tanakh. So I was very, very already just intrigued with just like, all of the stories and everything like that. As I began to learn more, I started to get really, I think the biggest inspiration came to me from Hasidus and just watching and reading the stories of righteous people, right? And the overall attitude of Judaism of a person can strive and really attain a very, very high level of closeness to God, you know what I mean, and a high level of perfection, you know what I mean, and after coming from obviously faith that didn't even really believe in that, believe that everything was doomed for you and you only meet this one person or else you're never gonna, it was very, very, very powerful for me. So I think that, Hasidus in general really like stuck out to me and really gives me inspiration, gives me fire, even every day. And I would say in terms of orthodoxy, it wasn't like for me, like I took, you hear from my story, like I was like, okay, now there's Judaism. Let me study Judaism and all of its branches, and then let me figure out where I go. I didn't really look at anything like that. I just followed my heart towards God. People ask me, how'd you become a vessel? Like, I was just following my heart. I came across teachings. I just told you my story. Was I doing fasting, crying out to Hashem? Rabbi Nachman talks about crying out to Hashem. Said, wow, I know that I identify with that, you know what I mean? And those Torahs obviously took me to a different place in terms of my relationship to Hashem. So that was sort of where I found myself. So I didn't think about like, oh, there's the conservative, there's reform, there's like, where do I fit? I wanted to be wherever was going to get me as close to Hashem as I possibly can be. I can't stress enough the amount of fire that was in my heart, searching and seeking for real closeness to God. And I wanted to really submit myself and to give myself over to him in every single way possible. Retrospectively, I could look back and say, I see obviously why I wouldn't have been maybe more so attracted to reform or conservative. Not there's not spiritual people there, but that's not really the mahalach or the path of those different branches of Judaism. So I don't think there was anything ever that made me consider or to look at them as a possible place for myself. So it just wasn't a thought for me. I just was going, and this was the natural progression of that. In terms of racism here, there definitely have been, I'm sure issues that people, in terms of the Ethiopian community, people that I have been in touch with, yes, I have heard from the South. At the same time, being an African American and coming from America and being a descendant of slaves, I wouldn't say that it's the same thing. And even any racism that I've encountered here is not the same thing in terms of what people may have experienced in terms of traditional racism. If you're going to tell me right now in 2020, 2021, I'm not comparing it to that because most of the issues that we're having today in America may be systemic, and a lot of them are failure to, in my honest opinion, the Black community to get up and to move. Once you had one person or another person, a three person, there's a lot of Black people that it never gets on camera, that are doing very well and have been very successful in America. Very, very successful. Once I see that one and that one and that one, as a young man, you're not going to tell me that I can't achieve anymore. I already see one that does it. I've had friends who, I had a friend in high school who's doing very well now, who both his parents were strung out on crack cocaine. He lived with his grandmother who worked it, until the nights. He had the whole house to himself. He had everything. He had 4.0s all the way throughout high school. That never got himself into trouble. Ended up getting it and working for a law firm. Ended up going to law school. So I've seen it too many times. So nobody's going to tell me that you can't succeed. You understand? So, but in terms of traditional racism that African Americans have had to bear over the years, 1960s Jim Crow era, there's none of that going on over here at all. In fact, from its inception, Ethiopians didn't come here on boats enslaved in chains also too. So it's a whole different story altogether, not to take away from the struggle, but also I don't believe that the color to some degree is preventing them from getting, high paying jobs and different things like that. I don't know if that's where the struggle is. More blatant, because Israel's more blatant. More blatantly, we're here things about your differences or what may separate you from other people, you may get that. You know, if I'm walking through a neighborhood and it's happened and it calls me Kushi Kushi, you know, in a Haredi neighborhood, they're calling me that because I'm different than them, not because they think that, it's not connected in any way to 400 years of what slavery was in America, that you're different from me. It's unacceptable, but it just means it doesn't extend beyond that. It's not going to stop me from achieving anything or anything like that. It won't stop me also from going to go tell his mother and his father, you better get your son. So, I just think it's very, very important to like really look at when we talk about racism. And I had this conversation with my Ethiopian friends also too, like just like we can't really call it the same thing. It's a different thing. It's still unacceptable from anybody, but to say I've actually seen it myself, I haven't. I've only talked to people and they've told me about the experiences that they had here.
Now, can I ask?
Andrew, let's give some other people some time, okay?
Yeah, could I ask?
Grayson, you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi. First off, I want to say Uman and Rosh Hashanah.
Uman Rosh Hashanah.
I wanted to bring to light one of your songs that is definitely relevant today, World Heroes. That definitely is, I would encourage everyone that's on to listen to that song for today. But most importantly, my question to you, I've actually got to talk with you personally. We're in a lot of chats, or one chat, Zadikum, and I had one question in regards to being a father. I think that's probably the biggest thing on my mind, and where I'm at in my life now. We get it, we understand that this is emes. We understand that this Yiddishkeit, there's no replacing it, and there's nothing, there's no other connection with Hashem known to mankind that's better than this Yiddishkeit that we're on right now, this deen, and doing this tikkun. But it's correlating this and delivering it to people younger than us, not only in our own families, but in our community, which, your music is doing a phenomenal job in doing. It is rebranding, Judaism to a whole nother level, whereas, the stuffiness or the rigidness of Orthodox Judaism that's turned so many people away, this is really bringing a lot of schus to. I have the pleasure of being in the Jacksonville community, where I see phenomenal fathers every single day. It's an unbelievable experience to see Yiddishkeit being passed along by men that are holding it down. Plain and simple. Mothers that are setting the playing field where Yiddishkeit can flourish. But my concern, and that's always, that's my thing, that's my challenge. My concern is making sure that, what we worked hard for, you being, a convert and me being in the Garish process myself, not losing that Kedusha, that losing that in the home, and how we see what we see now, because what we see in representation, what we see every day in Jewish men and women and these Jewish, mishpachim, these homes, is generations, 3,000 years of generations of this being passed along, learning, and applying it to our lives, and holding these halachas dear to us. And my question is how do we keep this going? How do we keep this going? How do we keep the fire burning, in Breslov, in Breslov language? How do we keep this fire going? And what challenges have you seen? You said you skimmed past it real lightly. You're raising Israelis, you're raising Israeli children. I pray that I merit to have that same experience in my life. But I want to be as prepared. You know, I know there's, you know, even my mom says you can't never be prepared to be a parent, you know, just like you can't never prepare to be, you know, a husband and all these things, even though I read a lot of books and I have great representation, but until you actually do it.
Grayson, so I don't mean to interrupt, but could you let Nissim answer your question, please?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So this is a very, 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 very good question. And this will probably answer slightly another question that came up that Rabbi didn't ask. And one of that question was about why did I change also my musical style from, you know, before being less culturally, I would say, African-American, to now being much more culturally in line with the music that I may be even more familiar with, that I grew up, that may be closer to me. And very much so, after, you know, really struggling with that question and going through a lot of different things, personally trying to figure out where I needed to be, you know, in terms of musically, because a lot of things that were going on in my life at that time. I remember going to my rabbi, and him telling me not only should it be something that I do, but I very much so I need to do. And going to other different righteous people inside of in Yerushalayim, other big rabbanim, you know, in terms of tzaddikim, tahom, that told me that this is mamish the path for me to go in, to worry about really people that are more distant from Yiddishkeit than everything else. And I start to see bracha with it only when I experienced the experience that I had also with my own children, in addition to the school issues that we were having. You know, my kids were having problems on the playground. Now, you know, I lived in Mea Shearim and everything else. And this started everything that you talked about, you know, just now when you asked this question. I started to have these concerns. What about, you know, these kids that are coming up that are also African-American and also, you know, are of, you know, colored, and they're growing up, and, you know, what's going to be for them? What's going to be their representation? And I sort of felt like it was a major need for me to sort of find myself. And now, although very scary, because, you know, you don't have great examples of success of people that cast their net out there and are able to, you know, gather in more people without them really affecting them. But there's a Torah and Lekutei Maran, chapter 59, that talks about when one goes out to gather in people that are very, very far away from Hashem, the Rechokim. It says that over there's a lot of klippas, a lot of evil also too in the world. And a person has to, once he goes out into the world, he has to be understanding of the evil that's in the world, and that it may attach itself to the person. So what's the eitzah? What's the advice? The advice is to bring holy fire. How do you bring holy fire? Rabbi Nachman says through the aspect of mishpat, of judging oneself. In other words, talking to Hashem every single day, and a person making serious cheshbon and nefesh on himself, in order that he's not allowing himself to be tricked or pulled to the left or to the right by the evil that there is out there in the world, in order to be able to go out and grab the tzutzei, kedusha, to grab sparks and to bring them back and to come out unscathed. If he has this aspect of mishpat, which later on it goes deeper, that it builds holy malachim, angels, to go out and fight fire on that person's behalf. So that's on one level, to be able to go out and to be able to spread it and feel like you're giving something going to be sustainable, because that you know that you have a certain amount of protection on you. When it comes to transmitting it to the children and different things like that, first thing is not to be afraid. Not to be afraid. First thing is, if Hashem has brought a person already this far and everything, he didn't do that for your next. We have to make some decisions. One of our conscious decisions that we made in moving to Israel was because we realized that our kids are, you know, of color. In our neighborhood where we were coming from, the other people of color that look like them were not involved in activities we would ever want our kids to be involved in. So we didn't want them to think like, oh, I'm only people that are not my color are Jewish, because, you know, the time comes where your parents are no longer the coolest people in your life. You start to look around at peers and everybody else that's around you. And we didn't want them to say that, you know, the only way that I can identify with who I am in terms of my skull and my skin and my personality, it has to mirror other people that look like me. That's where the most comfortable. As opposed to to move to Israel, where there's every shade of different type of Jews all around, right? And even people our color, where it's less of a threat towards them. So I think environment is everything also too, that you don't put them in an environment where they have to constantly feel like, oh, we're the only ones, or we're the only ones, I'm the only one. So I think that's important. And the other thing is serve Hashem be'emes. The way to keep the fire, serve Hashem with fire, with holy fire. The way to keep the fire is to go with fire. You have to go with fire. Everything should be that you're overly joyous and understand that it's a real war. It's a person that's fighting a war every day. To get up is a war. You know what I mean? So that I think that to say that probably goes to the first part. You have to do a lot of tefillah, a lot of davening, and a lot of going to see and be around holy and righteous people. It's very, very important. Everybody does it in whatever business that they're in, and they want to be successful. And in any type, they go and find somebody that's very, very successful, and in that business or whatever trade that they want to involve themselves in. So a person that wants to ascend the path and the levels of holiness, you need to go around people that's what they do for a living.
Thank you so much. Again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. A big thank you to Nissim for telling us about your life. It was fascinating and inspirational. A big thank you to Alex and Jacob for sponsoring this event and allowing this to happen. Please look on the chat. There's links for our next programs. As I said, it's on our website, our WhatsApp group, and on our Facebook page. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. And a big round of applause for.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great program.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Drew was probably watching the Nissim Black thing.
Shakar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When's the next concert in New York?
Oh man, please let them open it up soon. As soon as they open this up and that up, I'm there.
Come to Jacksonville. God bless.
Yeah, come to Jacksonville. What do you mean, New York?
Jacksonville is open.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Looking forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.